The patient breathing?
No.
They're not breathing?
No.
Who was it we're talking about?
Lexi, she's 3.
She's 3. Bear with
Yeah.
me. Okay. So she's unconscious and she's not breathing?
No.
On January 15, 2018, Louise Porton dialed the 999 emergency contact number, describing that her 3-year-old daughter, Lexi Draper, was unconscious and not breathing. Despite the urgency of the situation, when the paramedics arrived, Louise's demeanor was unsettlingly calm. As they rushed to assist Lexi, they were met with a chilling sight. A lifeless body, her skin tinged blue and her jaw clenched tightly shut. Despite their desperate efforts, it was too late. The 3-year-old was pronounced dead at the scene, but the tragedy didn't end there. Just 18 days later, Louise made another call, this time to 111 care advice number, reporting that her 17-month-old daughter, Scarlett Vaughn, wasn't breathing. In an extreme situation like this, why did Porton call 111, which is a non-emergency number, instead of 999? Did she think the numbers were the same, or was there something more sinister behind her actions? The deaths of both kids cast suspicion on Louise, prompting a closer look at her background. As investigators delved deeper, Louise's past began to reveal a darker side. Louise Porton was born in 1996 in the town of Wall, located outside Birmingham in the UK. She grew up with her mother, Sharon Porton, and 2 siblings. From a young age, even as a child, Louise's behavior was a challenge for her family. While her family was close-knit, Louise often stood apart, displaying manipulative and cunning tendencies. She would often lie to her parents and try to manipulate her siblings and cousins, getting them into trouble. Notably, Louise displayed violent behavior towards her siblings and cousins, threatening them physically on multiple occasions. As she grew older, Louise's relationship with her family deteriorated further, especially with her mother. Her mother's affair and departure when Louise was a teenager had deepened her animosity towards her. Despite her siblings maintaining contact with their mother, Louise had cut ties completely. During her teenage years, Louise's behavior continued to worsen. She frequently clashed with her family, neglected school, and even got into trouble with the police. It's reported that she engaged in theft and displayed selfish and cold behavior. Additionally, Louise's apparent promiscuity became a significant issue. She sought attention from men, often using physical intimacy as a means to gain gifts and money. This behavior continued into her adulthood, where she extended it to online platforms, engaging with numerous men in exchange for gifts and money. Alongside this, Louise was also active online, posting photos to attract attention from men. She engaged in various forms of cosplay, dressing up in different costumes, and sending out photos in exchange for payments or gifts. Over time, her photos became more revealing, and she began claiming to be a model. Louise signed up with several model agencies, including one called Purple Port. However, the legitimacy of Purple Port is questionable, as some online reports suggest it may be used for exploitive purposes. Despite potential risk, Louise pursued modeling opportunities and offered intimate services to photographers for money. In addition to her modeling endeavors, Louise became a mother in late 2014 at the age of 18, giving birth to her first daughter, Lexi. However, she did not settle down and continued her lifestyle. Despite being a mother, Louise also had a strained relationship with Lexi's father, Chris Draper. Louise also had conflicts with her family which were aggravated by her online behavior and refusal to prioritize her daughter's well-being. When her grandmother passed away, Louise's refusal to visit or attend the funeral led to further estrangement from her family. Despite these issues, Louise had another child, Scarlett, at the age of 20 with the same father as Lexi. As the children grew, Louise's actions became increasingly concerning. She spent hours every day on dating apps and websites seeking casual encounters and making money from these relationships. Louise would frequently leave her children with others or alone at home under the care of her landlady while she went out to meet strangers. This was to the point where the children spent more time with the landlady than with their own mother. In some cases, she even brought these men back to her home, putting her children in danger. Family members and acquaintances had grown increasingly worried about the safety and welfare of Lexi and Scarlett. They had reported Louise to social services, but no action was taken. The situation worsened as Louise began to view her children as a burden in her life. particularly when it came to her physical exploits. As Louise's life continued to spiral out of control, her relationship with her children's father, Chris Draper, remained strained. She even refused to allow him any contact with Lexi and Scarlett, going as far as giving Scarlett a different last name, Vaughn. This situation had taken a dark turn when Louise decided to move the family to Skiddaw Rugby, an hour away from Chris, effectively cutting him off from his children. Louise's sister Karen Porton had also tried to extend help to offer support whenever she could. However, Louise's priorities remained skewed. Many of the men she interacted with were clearly not suitable, with one even referring to her children as babies. Family members continued to express their worries to Louise, but she dismissed their concerns and even made light of the situation. Many had speculated that Louise might have given her children sedative medications to keep them unconscious while she pursued her own interests. In the following months in 2017, this negligence and abuse took a toll on Lexi and Scarlett, who were left to fend for themselves in their mother's absence. As Louise's relationship with her children deteriorated, so did her mental state. She became more aggressive and verbally abusive, lashing out at her children at the slightest provocations. On multiple occasions, she repeatedly subjected Lexi and Scarlett to physical violence, beating them to manipulate their actions and silence their cries. Social services continued to fail to intervene, leaving Louise free to continue her destructive path. As Louise continued to be consumed by her own desires and unable to cope with the responsibilities of motherhood, she had reached a grim decision and had devised a plan to rid herself of the burden her children had become. On January 2, 2018, Louise reached out to her sister, expressing worry about Lexi experiencing a fit. However, Louise only made the call after Lexi's condition had significantly worsened. This carelessness continued even after Lexi was discharged from the hospital, with Louise focusing more on her dating activities than her daughter's health. Meanwhile, Louise's Google searches showed a darker truth to the investigators. She had searched about suffocation, breathlessness in children, and how it might lead to death. And slowly, the investigators came to realize that her Google searches were not driven by genuine concern, but rather a more sinister motive. Tragically, just 2 days later, on January 4, 2018, Lexi fell seriously ill, and Louise called 999, claiming her daughter had stopped breathing. However, her emotionless demeanor during the call had raised further doubts about her sincerity. When paramedics arrived, they found Lexi in a critical condition, with her lips, fingers, and eyes turning blue. It was evident that she had been in the state for a prolonged period before Louise had finally called for help, exposing the extent of Louise's neglect and indifference towards her daughter's life. Paramedics couldn't comprehend how a healthy child like Lexi could suddenly experience 2 life-threatening incidents within such a short period. During Lexi's 4-day hospital stay, Louise remained at the hospital using the opportunity to send messages and explicit photos of herself to men and even flirt with hospital staff. After Lexi was discharged, the doctors could only conclude that a possible chest infection might have caused her symptoms. Lexi was brought back home, and Louise's actions continued to be callous and manipulative. CCTV footage from the hotel showed Louise and kids returning back home from the hospital, and her attitude even at this time clearly showed that she had no interest in caring for her children. She exploited her daughter's health issues to solicit money from men, claiming she needed financial assistance to care for Lexi. Louise's Google searches also became increasingly concerning, as she looked up methods of self-harming and information about resuscitation and death. It became evident that she was researching ways to kill her daughter while making it appear as an accident. Investigators had gone through the searches she made January 2nd and 4th, and over time, Louise's Google searches became more specific, focusing on the timing of calling emergency services after causing a person's death. She had even searched how long would a body take to turn blue over suffocation. This revealed her intention to ensure that she could still dial 999 after murdering her daughter, but not so early that she could be revived. Despite her heinous intentions, Louise continued to deceive men by fabricating her daughter's health condition, claiming that she was dying from a deadly flu. It seemed that her lack of empathy and the extent to which she was willing to manipulate others for her own twisted purposes knew no bounds. On January 14, 2018, The tragic incident unfolded when Lexi and Scarlett had visited Louise's sister, Karen. After returning home at 6 p.m., Lexi's health suddenly deteriorated again. Louise called 999, claiming her daughter was unconscious and not breathing. When paramedics had arrived, they found Lexi unresponsive, with signs of rigor mortis, indicating she had likely been dead for several hours before the emergency call. Despite their best efforts, Lexi was pronounced dead at the scene. Despite the heartbreaking loss of her daughter, Louise continued her manipulative behavior. It was found out that she had accepted 41 friend requests on her dating app very next day and exploited Lexi's death to solicit money from men. She even set up a GoFundMe account for her daughter's funeral, potentially using the donations for her personal gain. Her insincere Facebook post about Lexi further highlighted her lack of genuine grief. In the days following Lexi's death, Louise was seen laughing and joking with friends, even at her daughter's funeral. But this didn't stop there. Scarlett wasn't any different than Lexi to her mother and was also a burden to her. At the funeral, Louise's mother appeared in her life after Lexi's death, offering to help plan her funeral. Concerned, Louise allegedly mentioned that Scarlett might meet the same fate as Lexi, but no one reported her suspicious behavior to the authorities. On February 1st, just 18 days, her words came true. Louise and Scarlett stayed in a hotel room, and despite Scarlett being healthy, her condition suddenly deteriorated. Louise messaged the men she was seeing, asking for £30 to cover petrol costs for taking Scarlett to the hospital. These men urged her to call an ambulance, but Louise only wanted attention and money. At 9:50 p.m., Louise left the hotel with Scarlett, but she didn't rush to the hospital. Instead, she drove around town taking her time and acting nonchalant, as if her daughter's life wasn't in danger. Surveillance footage at traffic stops at Hill Morton showed her driving around the city with no intention of reaching out to the helplines. She pulled into a gas station where surveillance cameras caught her. In the footage, we can see Louise taking her sweet time with her daughter fighting at death's door in the car. No concern or urgency can be seen on her face or behavior. Eventually, 30 minutes later, she pulled up into a shopping center where she dialed 111. Now, for people outside the UK, 111 is the non-emergency helpline, while 999 is the emergency helpline number, and she still chose to dial 111. By the time the paramedics had arrived, Scarlett was found dead and lifeless. It was again discovered that the child had been dead for a few hours before Louise had called for help. The doctors found that the death was consistent with deliberate airway obstruction, and Louise again showed little concern at the sudden and unexplained death. Doctors could not find any natural reason why either of the children would have died in such a manner. Meanwhile, when asked by the paramedics, Louise claimed that Scarlett had the flu. In both Lexi and Scarlett's cases, forensic experts conducted extensive post-mortem examinations. It was revealed that their deaths were intentional and not accidents. Lexi died from the deliberate obstruction of her airways. Examiners had found marks on her nose, indicating her nose was held shut, and she had scratch marks on her neck, suggesting she was fighting her mother's hands as Louise suffocated her. In Scarlett's case, the 17-month-old died from the obstruction of her airways as well. She had bruising around her neck and head, damage to her neck muscles, and bleeding in her lungs. Some of Scarlett's blood was also found on the pillow of the hotel room where she had died. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Louise had never admitted to her actions or shown remorse. Although there was not enough evidence to formally arrest her at the time, investigators continued to pursue the case, knowing that Louise was responsible for the murders of these innocent children. So nearly a year later, in January 2019, police finally gathered enough evidence to bring charges against her for the murders of her two children, and on the 20th of March 2019, Louise was arrested. In August of 2019, her trial began as she had pleaded not guilty. Overwhelming evidence was presented against her, including her chat history on dating apps, her neglectful behavior towards her children, and the results of the post-mortem examinations. On August 3, 2019, the jury found her guilty. Louise Porton was ultimately sentenced to 32 years in prison. However, many believe this sentence is insufficient, considering her young age at the time of sentencing, being only 23 years old. There are concerns that she might be released early if she behaves well in prison. During the trial, she showed no remorse and emotionlessness. She just stood there without any guilt of murdering her own kids. While speculations abound, the motive behind Louise's actions remains unclear. Despite undergoing a mental health assessment, no diagnoses were made, and she was deemed to be of sound mind at the time of the murders. The prevailing theory is that Louise saw her children as burdens, especially in relation to her immoral life, and thus decided to eliminate them. The aftermath of this case left everyone connected to it devastated. Louise's mother, Sharon Porton, fell into a deep depression, feeling she could have done more to help her two young granddaughters. Tragically, on February 4, 2020, she was found dead in her residence, having taken her own life at the age of 40. Also, the girl's father, Chris, experienced intense anguish. He expressed regret and frustration, feeling he could have done more to pursue custody when the opportunity arose. Now, the sorrow of never having met his 17-month-old daughter, Scarlett, consumes his every thought, even 18 months after the girls' deaths. In remembrance of the victims, Lexi Draper and Scarlett Vaughn, described as two sweet girls with infectious smiles and vibrant personalities, a white horse-drawn carriage adorned with purple was arranged to transport them to their final resting place. Their untimely deaths cut short lives that held endless promise.